Well, if you're new with us, we are in the middle of a series in what's a time in the Christian calendar called Lent. And Lent has traditionally been a time where we have a more serious focus on the journey of Jesus to the cross and then the subsequent resurrection on Easter. It's usually 40 days, and it's odd. If you actually do the math, you're like, it's more than 40 days. But they usually don't count Sundays. They don't. They don't count those Sundays as one of those days. And so if you kind of do the math starting on Ash Wednesday, which we had a online experience that way, all the way to Easter is the period of Lent. And usually we have this a lot more kind of serious reflection. And if you're new with us, we just got done doing the book of Ezekiel, which is a pretty intense book. A lot of stuff where we talked a lot about the word repentance and what that meant, and that's pretty much what Lent is a lot like. And I thought, man, if we just keep doing that, it's just going to be like overkill, and that's like all of 2022. So I wanted to kind of continue that journey as we kind of move on, and we call the series "Don't Waste Your Wilderness." And what we're doing with it is we're kind of walking through the greatest story of the Jewish people, which is the Exodus from Egypt. And a lot of that has a lot of similarity to the journey that Jesus is taking to the cross. And if you've been in the series so far, you've kind of seen some of those parallels. But we're continuing on that journey today. So if you have Bibles, we have physical Bibles in the back if you want them, or use your device. We'll also have it on the screen. But we're going to be in Exodus 19 today. I'm just going to read the first 8 verses this morning. But this is, last week we kind of talked about the Passover. We're kind of fast forwarding to the journey when they're at Mount Sinai, which is a pretty significant moment in this event. But we're going to start in verse 19 today as the Jewish people are wrestling with their identity. And we're going to start in verse 1. I'm going to read out of the NIV this morning. Exodus chapter 19, verse 1 says, "On the first day of the 3rd month after the Israelites left Egypt, on that very day they came to the desert of Sinai. And after they set out from Rephidim, they entered the desert of Sinai, and Israel camped there in the desert in front of the mountain. And then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called him from the mountain and said, 'This is what you're to say to the descendants of Jacob and what you're to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites.' And so Moses went back and summoned the elders of the people and set before them all the words the Lord had commanded him to speak. And the people all responded together, 'We will do everything the Lord has said.' So Moses brought their answer back to the Lord." Let's pray together. God, I ask this morning, as always, that my words would be your words. Lord, that you would open our minds and our hearts to a fresh word this morning, whatever that is. God, we know that you can use this time to speak in all sorts of different ways to different people. So God, I pray that individually you speak to us. I also pray that you speak to us collectively as a group of people, as a body, as your kingdom of priests this morning. In the name of Jesus, and everybody said, amen. Well, no matter how old you are, I'm sure that you can think of many moments that you would say have shaped you. Like, I like to call them milestones. You know what a milestone is? It's like a marker that kind of marks some significant moment, and you kind of go back to it and you remember. It's kind of like you go to a park and they have like those little displays about what this view is and those kind of things. But you have those in your life too. There's certain moments in your life, and most people can share like some milestones like that everyone would have in common. For example, for many of you, the first time you learned to ride a 2-wheel bike. Some of you still don't know how to do that. There's no judgment, okay? But it's a significant moment when you learn how to ride a 2-wheel bike. And I remember when my daughter, when we were teaching my daughter how to ride a bike for the first time. She's much older now. If you don't know me, she's 20. But anyway, when she was small and we're teaching her to ride a bike, and it's a little nerve-wracking if you've been a parent and you've talked, you know how that moment is, because it's like you're afraid of that moment. They're going to crash and they're going to cry and all that stuff, and you're just kind of a little anxious. But my daughter, she was the same, but she was catching on pretty quick. And I was pretty excited as we were riding down the street, and finally there was that moment where, and thankfully she had a bike that had it's almost like, it was kind of a banana seat that had a handle in the back, which was awesome because you can just kind of run alongside it. And so I would run along, holding the handle, I let her go, and she goes off, and it's great, and it's wonderful. And then I wish, I don't know if I have it on video. I was trying to find it. If we had it on video, I don't think we do. But I found a similar video that was the experience that happened next, and I think I have a clip of it. This is what happened next when, except I let her go. This guy is like running beside her, but I let her go. So Matt, I think, do I have it up there? There we go. This is what happened.
Go, correct it.
Yeah. So except imagine like you're running and I let go and I'm watching this from a distance. So she's riding, except it wasn't a mailbox. It was like one of those like metal for sale signs that was sitting in the yard. So she veered off the sidewalk. I mean, it was like crash. I mean, a big clash, and like it echoed throughout the whole neighborhood. And I mean, she face planted right into that thing and just fell right down. And of course, that moment you want to like, if your reaction is like, oh, whatever, but you don't want to like do it too much because then they'll think, oh wait, this is bad. Then they'll start crying. And so you're trying to like, I'm trying not to make her cry too much. It didn't matter. So she was, it was, I mean, because I think my reaction was, oh, like that. Like if you were in a crowd of like 4,000 people and you see stuff like that, that's what happened. And then I laughed a lot, and then she got mad at me. But yeah, I mean, you've had moments like that where you learn to ride a bike. But when you learn to ride that bike and you finally got two wheels, ooh, baby, that is a glorious moment, right? Because then you can travel farther from where you are. Now, of course, your folks or whoever is raising you give you some boundaries to say you can't go this far, at least where they can see you. But then there's a moment, parents, you know what happens, or they're going to ride off to a point where you cannot visually see them anymore, and you have no idea what's happening. Whether they ride over to the next street or right around the corner or right around the block, there's a moment where you can't see them. It's a little nerve-wracking, right? But for the person riding the bike, it is glorious. You are free. It's like this sense of responsibility and independence that you have, right? It's the same thing when you get your driver's license. And if you haven't got it yet, you'll see when this happens. When you get your driver's license for the first time, I mean, you remember what you felt like? It's like now I can drive a car by myself away from everybody else and then go wherever I want, kind of. As long as you have a car, you have a car or borrow someone's car. And then there's boundaries on that too. But man, for a parent, it's scary. Like they're just going to drive wherever, or what I did, which I was really excited about. It's like, oh, now I can send her to the store instead, and so I let her go run all the stuff. She didn't do that. I still had to go, but it's a little nerve-wracking. And then when you have a driver's license, when you finally get out on the road, I mean, there's a moment that you realize, yes, I am now responsible for driving a lethal weapon. Right? I mean, it's a little, and especially when you get in the traffic or in Michigan, when you experience the first winter and you have to drive on icy roads by yourself, and that's a little nerve-wracking for a parent, obviously. But then the idea of accidents, whatever. But there's a sense of freedom with that, right? I mean, it's glorious. For me, I took all my freedom to getting a speeding ticket within the first 6 months of getting my license. I was really excited. But I mean, there is a sense of freedom that comes with that, but yet, with that freedom comes a whole new set of responsibilities that you probably weren't aware of. I mean, you heard about it, but to go through the experience and realize, oh, wow, this is serious. Now, obviously, sometimes those moments come where you hit the sign in the yard or you have an accident, right, that make it very vivid to you that, oh, this is a lot more than I thought it was going to be. And I would like to propose that is what the Israelites are experiencing when they get to Mount Sinai. Because now, if you notice in the text, it's 3 months later. They have been in slavery since, I don't know, the beginning for them. I mean, it's been generations of this slavery. And now they're in the desert. They're free from whatever they were doing for these, umpteen years. And they're wandering in a desert. We talked about this before in the last couple of weeks, that when you have that moment where you feel like you're emerging from your slavery, it's like you think the magic wand's going to get waved and everything's going to be fixed and it's going to be great. And that is not what happened to the Israelites. They go right to the desert, and right before this text, we're kind of in between chapter 12 and 19 when we're talking about this, but in between, they start complaining. They're like, I wish we were back in Egypt. At least we had food there. At least we didn't go hungry. And it was blistering hot. And it's interesting to me to think about what they experienced and the kinds of things they said, because and you've noticed this, there's a lot of things in our lives that are very similar. In a lot of ways, the experience of the Israelites leaving Egypt is like what people would use the term as born again. Have you heard that term before, born again? It got used a lot when I was early on in my church life. I know a lot of evangelicals like to use the term, but it's from John chapter 3 in the gospel, where Jesus is talking to Nicodemus, and he says, "You must be born again." And Nicodemus is like, "Wait, I need to go back in the mommy's tummy, and like, how's that work?" They're like getting really confused and stuff like that. And she's like, "No." And then in church, we have this certain idea of what this means to us. And what I was taught about being born again is that Jesus changes everything for the better. I mean, that's kind of what the proposal was. It's like you have a new life. It's like a restart. It's like a fresh start. It's like, getting new ground to start on. That's a great name for a church, by the way. But that's what I was taught about being born again. And when you combine that with our American culture of individualism, because we are the kings of individualism in the world. Like the individual is more important than anything. We are the center of the universe. We are the world leaders at promoting that in the world. And you combine that with consumerism, when everything is a product, right? Born again kind of turns into this instant change type of experience. And so I remember when I was in church, like, and of course, if you've heard my particular testimony about how I became a Christian, it is pretty dramatic. There was a significant change that happened in my life. I mean, I was 17, I was on the verge of ending my life, to now like completely turning around. I mean, it was a tremendous life change. However, I remember people who like grew up in church, and they were feeling like, I don't want to say jealous, but kind of envious or like sad, like, well, I don't have that type of experience. Am I really a Christian? And they're asking this question in light of being born again and thinking like, I don't fit that box, so how does that work? And it became about this, you have to have this tremendous like experience to this born again time where Jesus changes everything for the better. And then when you start getting into like this journey with Jesus, you realize that's not how it works. That's not how it worked for Israel. That's what they wanted. Hey, everything's free. We can now, like, whatever this dream of hope that we had, and now we're walking in a desert, and we're hungry. And it's a lot worse than what it seemed to be back in Egypt. And so many people, when they talk about being born again, they get confused. Like, well, I don't know what this means. What is it? What is God talking about with this? They expected this new freedom to fix everything. And what they end up saying, and I think a lot of times what we end up doing, we say, you know what, I just wish I could go back to the way it was. Have you ever said that kind of stuff before? I've heard a lot of people say that about the pandemic. I wish we could go back to what it was before COVID, right? I wish we could go back to the way it was, to the old life, and for the Israelites, well, at least we had food and something to do, because now we're not doing anything. And I think this is the hardest part about being in the wilderness, when we're freed from our slavery, when we're emerging from our Egypt, because there are some things in our slavery that hints at the life that we're actually supposed to live, but it gets mixed up with things that aren't whole, things that are false. And we kind of got a taste of those things, but it's not entirely true. And here's what I mean by that. When the Israel, there's a time in the beginning of the story of Exodus, if you look at chapter 1, there was a time where the Israelites were in Egypt and they weren't in slavery. If you remember back in Genesis, from mid to the end of Genesis, you should read the story of Joseph. Joseph is the one that ended up in Egypt, and that was because his brothers tried to kill him. That's how he ended up there. And then Joseph was used by God to single-handedly save the Israelites from extinction. When they had a famine in the land, they had to move to Egypt because Egypt had all the food, because Joseph was in charge of of managing Pharaoh's whole entire logistics. And it was able to feed people and families. So everyone's flocking to Egypt. And so the Israelites were enjoying this. There was a time that happened. And they were growing, and it says in Exodus chapter 1, I think verse 7, they're growing a number, and they're getting to like millions of people. And then when the new Pharaoh came in power, this new Pharaoh was very insecure, very narcissistic. If you know what narcissism is, it's kind of like a person who, I mean, it's actually an official disorder too, but there's a diagnosed narcissism, there's some things in but narcissism is like the person, like they're the most important thing, everything really revolves around them. There's actually a disorder there, and they become very toxic in the way they display that. I mean, I would like to argue Vladimir Putin is like that. I don't think I'm really off base on that. But ruthless, insecure, narcissistic dictator. That's who came into power, the new Pharaoh. And that's the new Pharaoh that decided there's too many of these Jewish people. Now we're going to kill all the young boys, all the firstborn boys. That's where we talked about that a couple weeks ago, and then we talked about Passover last week of kind of where that kind of came around full circle for them. So they weren't always in slavery. So there was moments that things were good, and even in their slavery, they are serving other people. And there's a part of, like, if you've served someone before, if you've done something for someone else, like out of the kindness of your heart or whatever, when you're doing that kind of action, when you're giving of yourself, there's a part of that that's good. And what I mean by that is when you're doing that, when you're walking in that way, there is a sense that something is right. However, when they're in slavery, they're doing that at the coercion of someone else. So someone else is forcing them to do those things, and they also are not treated like a human being. They're treated as a piece of property, right? You are not you're not a person. You are actually some commodity. You're some product for me to use to get my own pleasure or usefulness out of. That's what slavery is. That's what slavery does. But yet, when you serve, there's still something sense like there's something good about that. So that's all mixed in this bowl, and then they're in the desert, going towards Sinai, and they're thinking about all this stuff, and they're like, you know what? And this was the attitude. Maybe it really wasn't that bad, because at least we had food, at least we had some shelter. We didn't have to worry about thinking too much of what we had to do next. We could just, people just tell us, they give us food, we got everything we need, we're fine. Yeah, it's definitely not ideal. I mean, there's people in power and it's not us, but at least we can live and survive. And that's what happens a lot when you're in slavery. Now, I'm not a professional therapist, and I know there's some people here that are. But it's interesting to me to see how frustrating it is when you or someone that you know has been in an abusive relationship. I don't know if you've been in one, you know what I'm talking about, and if you know someone who has, you understand this. It gets frustrating sometimes when you see patterns where the person might continue to find other people that are just the same, or maybe it looks a little different, but they're still they're not the best people. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like, you get frustrated, why do they keep gravitating toward these people? Or why do I keep gravitating toward this? Why do I run into these people? I thought I checked all the boxes, and now I discovered this. And however that abuse comes, but it seems strange. Like, why do I keep gravitating toward that? And what's interesting about slavery for us is there's a lot of times that we don't even know the patterns that we've inherited from slavery that are not healthy for us. I know some people that I've talked with who've been in abusive relationships. They don't have any intention of gravitating toward people that are the same like that. That's not the intention. And at the same time, there's patterns that have been picked up about how you behave under certain circumstances around certain types of people, or even yourself, how you respond to certain situations, it comes with a lot of baggage. And a lot of times, it's like, how do you get out of something like that? How do you break a cycle like that? And I think this moment is a lot like that for them. I mean, and why you would say, I'd rather go back to Egypt, because at least there's something I can hold on to there. At least there's something there that I can control. Because right now, they're out of control. There's nothing in their lives where they have no idea what's happening. They're free. All they've known is slavery. And all the patterns thereof, known and unknown. And now they're sitting at Sinai, and they've been complaining to Moses about their situation. And I think, man, we have several Egypts that always pop up in our lives. I don't want to just mention abusive relationships. It doesn't matter what it is. But there are patterns that we are enslaved to. And sometimes we don't even realize we have inherited. And I've told, if you've been here long enough, there's a series I did a couple years ago, I believe, on emotionally healthy spirituality, one of my favorite ones I've done. But one of the Egypts that I struggle with is the phrase that I'm not good enough, or I'm not whatever enough. You can fill in the blank with whatever that is. But and it took some significant time in professional therapy for me to realize this. And friends, this is just recently, okay? This is like within the last 2 or 3 years for me. And I'm something years old. All right? So, but my parents were divorced when I was 4 years old. My mom drained my dad's bank account, ran off to Vegas. My dad went bankrupt. Naturally, he didn't have any money. It was all gone. And he had to dump my sister and I off with his mom and dad, our grandparents, all within a month at 4 years old for me, 2 years old for her. And all I knew is that my mom left and my dad dumped us off with grandma and grandpa. Now, for the next 7 years, we lived with my grandparents who loved us. It was, having a mom and dad in a sense. They raised us from 4 years old to 5th grade. And I had the benefits of having, for lack of a better term, parents, except for my grandparents. And it wasn't perfect, and I've shared some of those stories before. But what is interesting as I'm kind of processing this is that message of I'm not good enough started there. Because all I knew is that I wasn't valuable. Both my parents left me, literally on the doorstep of my grandparents. But I didn't know at the time that had any effect on me. But all throughout the rest of my life has always been this message that I'm not good enough. And it started there. And then there's other milestones and events that happened that would emphasize that. And there's a narrative in my brain that would replay that over and over again. And there was patterns that I picked up in the midst of that to survive, to move on. And it wasn't always perfect. I kind of credit it in some ways to the way I worked harder, because except my motivation for working harder was to prove everybody wrong. Like even to this day, there's a drive in me that if you beat me at something, I will work harder than you. I will work hours upon hours to be better than you, to beat you. That's really unhealthy, by the way. Although that is the drive in some sports, right? And that helped me get through school. Because I also found out I had ADHD like most of my life. And I just got that diagnosed 2 years ago. It made sense to me now after I got it. Like, I can't focus on anything for more than like 30 to 45 minutes. That was a problem in school. So I made everything a competition because I wasn't good enough. So I'm going to beat everybody at everything. School, sports, choir, you name it. I'm going to beat you. So the hard work thing's fine. It's good. But the productivity part, the idea that my identity and worth came from what I did and my performance, that was not healthy. And that still, to this day, is a problem. In fact, someone mentioned this to me last week. In one of my not so great moments, because 2022, it's been not a great moment for me so far in all sorts of ways, I put a rant on social media how I was frustrated at my dart game. I play darts. And I feel like I saw that. Like, what are you doing? Yeah, I wrote that late at night after I got crushed in a match again, and I'm playing the worst darts of my life in like 15 years. I mean, ever. Like I'm like 5 levels below what I was like 3 years ago. It's really frustrating. And I used to be one of the best people in the city of Grand Rapids playing darts, and now I'm like nobody. I'm getting slaughtered by all my friends that I usually beat. And it's very frustrating. So I wrote this rant on Facebook. It was not one of my best moments, but I did it so I could I get off my chest. Like, I just want to say it and so I can move on with whatever else I'm thinking about. It did not work. I thought it was, and it didn't. But it really wasn't about darts. Now, and I knew this now, but kind of, I just didn't want to be honest about it at the time. It was about that pattern and that message again. Like, why does it matter that I win at darts? I mean, really. Like, why does it matter if I win at a board game? Like, why does it matter I win at whatever? Why do I have to beat somebody? It's like, it feels good. Well, why do I get concerned about that? What is the big deal? Because there's something further down in my slavery that a pattern was developed. And that pattern is, I'm not good enough, I'm not valuable, so if I show the world that I can do something good, or I am good at anything, I'm not mediocre, then people will accept me. They'll like me. They'll actually think I'm valuable. Do you see where this goes? That is what the people of Israel were experiencing. And they didn't realize that they had been hooked by patterns of slavery that they had inherited all their life that God wanted to free them from. Because the first thing that God says at Sinai, you know what he says to them? You are my treasured possession. First thing out of his mouth, boop. Why do you think he said that? And do you think that's something he hasn't said before? Genesis chapter 1, in the beginning of the narrative of creation, he makes human beings. And after he makes human beings on the 6th day, he looks at all of creation and says, it wasn't just meod, which is the Hebrew for good, it's tov meod, which is very good. Where humans are the pinnacle, the masterpiece of all that he's made because they are made in his image, in his likeness. The only thing that he has ever made that can say that. We are made in his image. There's nothing else in all creation that has that moniker, that has that label. It's us, human beings. You think that back then that humans were not his treasured possession? Of course they are. Of course you are. So Sinai wasn't anything new. It was a reminder of what always has been, and they had forgotten that God's like, look, you have functioned in your life that your identity is all about what you have produced, of what you can output in your life, what you do. And I need to remind you and reform your patterns in mind that you are my treasured possession, period, because you exist. Because I made you. And this is the lengths that I've gone to rescue you. And now, he's got him at Sinai, and he says, you're my treasured possessions, and now you're going to be my kingdom of priests. You know what a priest does? I mean, a priest back then, it's a big deal. A priest is the person that is in between God and the people. In every ancient Near Eastern religion, that's how it works. The priests, and Israelites had that. We'll talk about that in a second. They had a line of people that mediated between them and God. But God says to all the people, you are going to be my kingdom of priests. You are going to show the world what I'm like. You are going to show the world that your identity is not about what you do. It's about who you are, and you exist. Therefore, God thinks you're made in his image. Obviously, You need to tell people that. And you need to tell them how far I will go to rescue people. You, because you are my treasured possession. And that's the first thing he says at Sinai. And so many times I get brought back to that message that I'm not good enough. It's my Egypt. And there are things about it that were good. I mean, I'm grateful that I learned to work hard, even though it was under false pretenses, not the right kind of things. I'm glad I still have that ethic. But it's not healthy to attach that to my worth and my identity. And that has been the hardest journey to emerge from. And I feel like it's a journey I will continue to revisit and continue to emerge from over and over and over again. Because at Sinai, I mean, really, I love this word to think about. I mean, Sinai, it's an identity reformation. We're part of the Reformed tradition, but it's reforming. It's not just forming, it's reforming. It's also remembering, if you get what I mean. It's God putting back together what originally has been his design all along. That's what he's doing at Sinai. This reformation is happening, and God's like, listen, I know you're scared. I know you're frustrated. This is always what happens in the cycle of when you leave slavery. You feel uncertain. You have no idea what's going to happen. You don't feel like you have any control, and you feel like whatever this freedom that supposedly is happening doesn't really feel like freedom, and that you just rather go back to just surviving because at least that was certain. At least I had some basic stuff met. But what God's doing at Sinai is he's giving his people training wheels. That's because at Sinai is when he gave them the Torah. When he gave them the law, that's when he gave it to them. The Torah are training wheels. I don't know if you knew that. It wasn't like the Torah and the law is like, okay, this is it. Like, and it's like this, whatever. No, like God knew they had been in patterns of slavery for so long. They needed something to guide them along the right path, but they couldn't ride the two-wheel bike right away. Right? They needed some training wheels. That's what the law does. And God's training wheels are way better than anyone's epic bike, by the way. And that's what he gives them. And you're going to be my kingdom of priests. And I know you need training wheels. And eventually you're going to be riding on two. And I think sometimes what we forget is that there's Egypt and there's the promised land, which is where they're going to. And we always forget that there is a place in the in-between. And that is Sinai. It's in between Egypt and the promised land, and it seems like that journey continues to go that route, doesn't it? You keep revisiting Egypts over and over. You have to emerge from them, and you recognize the pattern. We talked about it in Passover, where you're so desperate, you can't fix it yourself. You try, but you can't, and you need a rescuer, and God does it. And then you're like, it doesn't happen like the magic wand, and then you're like wandering, like, when am I going to get to the light at the end of the tunnel? When is it going to be finally when I feel free? And then there's Sinai, and you're like, oh, I'm hungry. I should just go back. You know what? It's okay. No, God's like, you need to remember who you are. You are my treasured possession, and now you're going to be my kingdom of priests. But I got to give you some training wheels because it's going to be a little bumpy for a while. And what's interesting, and I love this quote from my mentor, Chuck DeGroat. This is what he says. He says, Sinai stands between Egypt and the promised land as a reminder that God is committed to taking as long as you need to form you into the person you were designed to be. I need to hear that today. Because you know how long they wandered in that wilderness? It was a long time. Because God knew it was going to take them a long time to be on the training wheels, to be the people that they needed to be for the rest of the world. And they had their moments where it worked. And there were moments where they fell down and crashed into a sign. and probably more than a sign, had some serious accidents, but God would keep bringing them back to Sinai over again. In fact, they celebrate this as as part of their festivals, to remember this. In fact, if you were in Exodus 20, the next chapter, he gives the 10 Commandments. What is the first part of the 10 Commandments that he says to them? He says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. Remember who I am. You are my treasured possession. And now I'm going to give you these training wheels. And there were things, even the 10 Commandments, and they're very broad, but they were things that were revolutionary to the time, right? We did a series on this, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago about the 10 Commandments, how revolutionary those commands were to live into that. And that law was part of the experience of true freedom. But they had to be brought back to Sinai to be reformed, to remember how God had created them to be in the first place. Because God has to put boundaries on the horrible patterns that slavery has done to us, and to give us other patterns of truly living a flourishing life. That's what happens with the law. And sometimes the in-between is a lot longer than you want. It's uncertain. And next week, whomever comes next week, when we talk about the golden calf, I mean, that's like the pinnacle of uncertainty, of what you do in uncertainty. But like this in-between is a lot longer, but we're constantly brought to this place to remember and to reform ourselves. And maybe, like me, you might have forgotten about your identity. Maybe it's been rooted in something else that's been a false narrative. And maybe you don't even realize it's happening. I mean, friends, okay, I'm 46 years old. I'll just say it. I'm 46 years old, and I'm still just now learning about these patterns. I'm not saying that as I don't want to be like, make you feel despair, like, oh my gosh, it's going to take that long. No. It takes as long as whatever God wants. God's patient with you, right? To allow that to happen. But when you forget about your identity, that I said to my last church or their youth group, like, you matter because you exist. That was one of our values. You matter because you exist. That is true about every human being on the face of the planet. You are my treasured possession. And he tells them, obey my commands. This law I'm going to give you is not some like bunch of like rules and regulations to make life not fun. That's not what this is about. This is actually given to you as the training wheels toward the flourishing life, to the kind of people that I've created you to be, a blessing to the world. And as you follow the story of Jesus, Jesus is constantly doing this with people. Thinking about all the people that he encountered who didn't have any dignity, who no one else thought was worth it. How many stories in the New Testament is Jesus going to people who everybody else thinks is not worth it, or lower on the totem pole, if you will, and constantly crying out for their dignity, which is what Moses is doing. We talked about Moses, right, doing the same thing. And then he says, I'm going to have a kingdom of priests that is supposed to be the people that show the world what I'm like. And Jesus was modeling that, and what he did in his life, and with this journey to the cross, this sacrifice that he makes, like this, absorbing the sin of all creation and entering into the hard times in that wilderness. And Moses is leading him to Sinai too, right? And he's going up the mountain. And it's hard. And he's like, man, the lengths that God will go. I delivered you from slavery. Now walk into this new life. It's going to be hard. But I promise you, if you continue to trust me, you will start to see what the salvation life is all about. And man, that is the promise as we go to the New Testament when Jesus shows up as the once and for all sacrifice, and why it matters so much. I mean, gosh, it blows my mind. Like, and I was a skeptic. I was a person who thought there's something that existed out there, but I hated Christians growing up, all that stuff. And what I couldn't get past when I finally got challenged was how how does this God actually still want to rescue us? Or me? Why does he do this? And I'm like, it's just so compelling to me to see the lengths that he will go. And that is true about every single person. And I don't know what you're going through right now. I mean, we've talked about how hard, I've heard the stories, but there's a lot of hard stories right now. There's a lot of wildernesses, a lot of Egypts right now. But what's interesting is what happens at Sinai in the wilderness is that God is letting you become aware of the patterns of slavery that you've inherited that maybe you weren't aware of before, and to reform you into the people that you want to be. And it's forged in the wilderness. It has to be. He has to get rid of that stuff. He has to snap you out of your stupor. Because when you're in slavery, you're like a zombie. You're just like, I'm just eating, I'm kind of doing my thing. It's kind of nice to be told what to do and just like kind of function and move on. God's like, man, there's such a better life ahead of you. And people need to know, but you need to know that you matter to me. And I'm the one that rescued you. And this is what I do because this is who I am. And I need you to tell everybody else the same. That there is a life that is ahead that is so much better than what you're living now. And that's why we exist. I mean, we're still here 2,000 years later. It just blows my mind thinking about that. Why are you even here? Why does Jesus matter? I mean, it was like 2,000 years ago, and you are here. Why? Something's compelling about that to me. I mean, as much as Josh said I'm not a professional Christian, which is true, I'm far from it. I've already told you that today. I'm glad I get paid for what I do. I'm not gonna lie. But I'm here because of this truth. Because God is constantly telling people, you are my treasure possession. I need people to hear that. I need people to hear that you don't have to live in slavery anymore. I need people to hear that there are patterns in your life that are destructive to you and others, and you may not even know it, and I'm here to rescue you from all of that. But I'm putting together a group of people to show the world what that looks like, and that is us. That's the call to us. That's the call to the Israelites at Sinai. And we're constantly being brought back because you and I need to remember that. Amen? You need to remember that. Because our culture is so ingrained into placing your value on what you produce. God can produce everything he wants and needs without your help. And yet, he has decided to ask you to be a partner with him in making the world a better place, in being a blessing. It blows my mind. And the first thing we have to be reminded of is like, by the way, it doesn't matter how many times you fall off that bike. You know who's going to be there to pick you up? Me. And he makes a covenant with them at Sinai, which we know that God is going to keep his end of the deal. That's what covenants are. And he always has, and he always will. And friends, you can trust in that today. And when Jesus comes and he dies on the cross, we'll journey toward that. That is the offer. It's the same offer. It's like, look, I'm here to give you the best life. I've shown you what that looks like. Now I want you to do the same. You need to remember who you are, the lengths that I will go for you. All right, I'm going to pray. God, I just feel like I know I could just be preaching this to myself today. And in what seems like a time where there's so much confusion and despair and hopelessness, and there's a lot of things happening in our world, especially the last couple of years, that just feels like it's all going to hell in a handbasket. And yet, God, we see you walking with us in the midst of our wilderness as a cloud at day and a fire by night. And God, we're still sometimes wishing we go back to the way it was because we find some certainty there. And so, God, I pray that we would remember that our identity is not based on what we produce. As good as we might be at it, that our identity is based because we are made in your image, that we matter because we exist, because you made us. And you love us so much that you will rescue us over and over again when we fall off our bikes, when we wreck the car of our lives, when we continue to go back to patterns of slavery that continue to destroy us. God, you continue to rescue us as we cry out to you. And so, God, I pray today that we would continue to have that posture, that we would be remembered and be reformed at our Sinai again, and to remember who you are. In the name of Jesus, and everybody said, amen. I don't know what stirred in your heart this morning. I think I was just stirring my own heart a little bit, but if something came up today and you need prayer, I don't know who's here to do that today. I'll just make Donna get up and do it. It's not really I'm not forcing her to do anything. She's just going to do it. And Mary Ellen's coming too. They would love to pray with you. I mean, I'm more than happy to pray with you as well. We love Jesus here, and I just told you why. I don't know whatever life that you're living, but there is a different way. That is the transforming life. And even though we're not all there yet, when we talk about we really want to live this good news 7 days a week, it's true. And I pray that whatever it is that you're going through, that you feel, that you have people here that you can. I don't care if you're new. I don't care how long you've been here. That there's people that will journey with you through that. You can come and talk to us and pray. You kind of learn that people around here are pretty. It's a tight knit family, but it's not a closed family. I like to say we're always looking for more people in the family, but I hope you can feel that trust today. If you don't, we're not going to push you either. I just want to invite you to do that. And if you want to talk more about this journey, I mean, I'd love to talk to you more about that, and I got people who'd love to do that as well. So let's all stand together as we receive this good word. They call it benediction, which literally means good word. May you remember that you are God's treasure, that your worth, your identity is not based on anything that you produce, no matter how good you are at it, but you matter because you exist. And may you live that truth amongst everyone you come across to show them the good news of Jesus and point to him in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Everybody